Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Well, we've come to the end of our summer series with the last two of our leaving home stories from Chelsea Barnwell and Isla Rickerton. I'm grateful to all of the writers from the Habit membership who contributed to this series with their stories of leaving home, literally or figuratively, temporarily or permanently. If you like the idea of writing alongside the writers you're hearing in this series, we'd love to have you. Find out more at thehabit.co. Our first story this week is by Chelsea Barnwell. She tells of a sojourn in Mexico in which she learned to strike a new balance between frugality and practicality on the one hand and beauty and prodigality on the other. Here's Chelsea reading Between the Baptist Preacher and the Art Teacher.
Between the Baptist Preacher and the Art Teacher by Chelsea Barnwell. You can fill up 2 full-size suitcases to an alarming, unbearable weight, and still leave behind almost everything. I was preparing to move to Guadalajara, Mexico, to teach 3rd grade. My contract was for 2 years. As I was staging my packing, I cried when I weighed the first suitcase. It wasn't even full yet, and still weighed 25 pounds over the 50-pound weight limit. I went through it again, pulling out unnecessaries, like my only mug, a hymnal, some extra clothes, and a few things for making my bedroom homey. Even as a child, I always found a lot of meaning and pleasure in beautiful things. Artwork, antique wooden furniture, old quilts, handwritten letters from friends, the vintage dress I wore for Easter when I was 16, the interesting candy wrappers and ticket stubs left over from vacations, etc. Everything in the spaces that belonged to me made me happy either because of a particular memory or a particular beauty. But when I finally got on the plane for Mexico, I brought only essentials. In Guadalajara, my rented room had white stucco walls, pale laminate built-in furniture, and beige tile floors. Even after I had put all of my belongings away, most of them went straight into the bathroom cabinets or the bedroom closet, the room still looked empty. A friend looking in would know that someone lived there, but I doubt any of them would have guessed that I, Chelsea, lived there. Guadalajara had a vibrant beauty. The jacaranda, the trumpet bush, and other trees were a profusion of purple, red, and yellow blooms, towering over delectable fruit trees, including mango, guava, and avocado. Tilework, pottery, embroidered blouses, and woven textiles featured the boldest colors and strong patterns. Lilting Tapatía Spanish filled my ears every day, and I went out salsa dancing every week. Yet back in my room alone each night, it was plain, white, hard, and cold. I hadn't been able to bring much beauty with me from the States because of suitcase restrictions. I also felt I couldn't afford the cost of adorning my room with Mexican beauty. Looking back, I wonder. I had been raised in church and family cultures where frugality was next to godliness. I never remember thinking we were poor. We always had everything we needed and more. My parents would make their money go further by purchasing things secondhand, looking for discount prices, and repurposing old things. This was how they could fill the whole living room with presents at Christmas. Our house was beautiful and comfortable through careful management and creative resourcefulness over many years. As I grew up, I came to learn that making money stretch was both a game and a responsibility. It was a game when we rode around in the minivan on Saturday mornings, stopping at yard sales to dicker over prices and look for hidden treasures. Sometimes we'd pull perfectly good furniture out of trash piles, and often reused old things to make new things. It almost became a joke at Christmas time to brag about how little money we spent on gifts. I hope you like your gift. I got it for $0.25. Or, I saw this on the side of the road and repainted it. We genuinely appreciated all the gifts we received and took no offense at the humble estate from which they came. However, money was a responsibility when considering how to give to the missionaries our church was sending around the globe. Our pastor would tear napkins in half at each meal, one half for him and one for his wife. He'd use tea bags a second time, and after using a cough drop halfway, would wrap it back up and save the second half for another day. Now it's interesting to consider how so many of his little efforts seem to involve settling for half of something. These were part of his timely tips for tight times, which came up in sermons at regular intervals. I don't think times were actually tight for us, but the principle still applied in economic security or even prosperity when considering the urgent need around the world for the gospel. I still believe that this need is truly urgent, and it has long influenced my decisions. This was one of the reasons I desired to go to Guadalajara in the first place, to learn from and serve a local church in a different culture, learn from cross-cultural missionaries, and ultimately to share the gospel. So when I thought about purchasing new furnishings and decor I couldn't take back with me, it seemed unwise. My home in the States was comfortable, despite its frugality, because of years of slow accumulation and the ability to easily purchase quality possessions secondhand. But 2 years felt too short for good investment. When I considered the house church I joined in Guadalajara, where some of the members didn't have running water and the pastor sold chickens to support himself, new furnishings seemed frivolous. I did eventually find a few little things to make my room feel more like home. I found a broken guitar on the curb and brought the pieces home to make a jewelry hanger. I also purchased a few things from other expats moving back to their home countries. These included a white bird cage, which felt like my vintage chic style bedroom in the States, and a white paper lamp, which allowed for softer lighting than the overhead fluorescents. But it wasn't until the second year, when one of my friends, a coworker from the school, also moved in, that the whole house began to explode with rich color, warmth, and comfort. Emma was everything I was not in many ways, but I loved her for it. She was the art teacher, and not only a teacher, a true artist. Her space was crammed full of art supplies, partially finished canvases and projects, bits of things that struck inspiration, and anything beautiful she found. She was a decade older than me and had learned what she liked to have around her. She rearranged and purchased furniture. She hung artwork, both her own and Mexican pieces she loved. She had a full Mexican ceramic blue and white dish set, which she used for serving tea and jam tarts. She was from England, and tea was a ritual that helped her, and I think anyone she served, whether they were English or not, to feel at home. The first year, when we lived in different houses with different housemates, I would love going to her home for any reason. It was full of beauty, warmth, soft lighting, and delicious food. When she moved into the house where I was living, she brought it all with her. She also brought a certain amount of tension. I liked to be on time, but Emma fit right in with the relaxed Mexican way of handling time, often lingering to enjoy something or finish a project, but completely miscalculating how long it would take. I once remember her pulling out the drill to finish up an art project 15 minutes before we had guests arriving for a party, saying, "I'm just going to finish this up." It was not finished before the party. She liked bold color and spoke her mind. "You always wear pastels," emphasis on the first syllable. "They're washing you out," she told me, and recommended I wear red and indigo blue more often. She was right, and I purchased a few traditional Mexican blouses in rich colors. Emma attended a charismatic church and also loved to speak the gospel, hosting ladies' Bible study and using art to engage people in conversation about hope and life, sometimes in surprising ways. Our house once smelled like a butcher's shop because she had somehow obtained a few quarts of blood from a carniceria to use for a particularly vivid art installation to raise awareness about human trafficking. Yet along with the blood were butterflies and flowers, hope of life only God can give. The exhibit featured 7 dresses, 6 representing stories of abuse and trafficking, and 1 representing hope of restoration. Emma asked me to help by sewing the 7th dress because she couldn't find one to purchase that matched her vision. I helped bring her vision to life and also sewed and embroidered small felt heart-shaped ornaments which people could purchase as reminders of the exhibit and to raise money for an anti-trafficking organization. This was one of the first times I had a strong sense that my creative skills had purpose, and the first time I significantly collaborated with another artist. When the time came for Emma to move back to England, she did her best to take it all: her art, the dish set, traditional clothing and textiles, and enough ceramic tile to fully tile her kitchen backsplash in England. A month before her departure, while we were on a weekend trip, she was even contemplating purchasing a small folk guitar, even though she didn't yet know how to play it. She sent her parents, who had come to visit, back with multiple suitcases. Her mom wore a Mexican sombrero back to England, so it didn't have to be counted as part of the luggage. Then Emma took everything else she could. As far as I know, she paid the extra baggage and overweight fees readily. She was the woman who had nothing to fear because her household was clothed in scarlet, and her beds in fine coverings, and herself in fine linen and purple. When I moved back to the States at the end of my contract, I packed the opposite way. I left behind most of the practical items, all the shoes I had worn to the soles walking everywhere on broken sidewalks and dirt, and many of my clothes, which were sweat-stained and dingy after 2 years without air conditioning. I, of course, brought back a variety of gifts for friends and family, but for myself, I brought hand-woven pillowcases, embroidered blouses, a wall hanging of peacocks from Chiapas, clay and wooden artwork from Oaxaca, and prints of some of Emma's artwork, which still hang in my home today, 10 years later. I'm still inclined to deny my first desire to spend money on anything, but I also have found that spending some money on my home is not only self-gratification, but often a way to serve the people I regularly invite into my home. And I love to have people in for tea or to make art together, just like Emma did. To serve them from my vintage mid-century Corelle dishes and colorful Pyrex, with flowers on the table, tasty food in reach, and gospel conversations throughout.
Chelsea Barnwell, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for sharing your story with us. I loved learning about Emma and the way she gave you another way of thinking about beauty.
Thank you. I appreciate Emma too.
So I think you say in your story, you're still frugal, right? Emma didn't completely turn you into a different person.
Right.
And so I want to talk about your relationship to extravagance. I mean, there's something I don't know if you'd say by definition, but maybe by definition, the making of art and beauty is unnecessary. It's an extravagance. So as a frugal person, what can you say about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that is something that I have been learning over the process of many years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Emma was one of the people who was kind of maybe like a window opening into understanding that better as I've interacted with different artists that I've admired. Especially her, I think it was because it wasn't an artist that I admired and I could only see their work. I was living with her. So I knew how that extravagance went to kind of all areas of her life. And it really was. It was beautiful to see. And I do remember at the time there being points of tension there or frustration, even maybe at certain times. But I do think she had a big part of that. And I do think my overall perspective on art, being extravagant, being a gift, you might have to waste materials to make good art. I write, but I also do things like sewing and that kind of thing. And materials get wasted if you do it the wrong way, or you try something and it doesn't work, and learning.
Yeah, there you go. If you try something that doesn't work, there's going to be waste. And if you don't try anything and you're just efficient, well, that's not the point. Like, efficiency is not the point. And I think it's so important for us to say art is important, which is not the same thing as saying art is necessary. And I think it is the unnecessity is a clue to why it's important. And I don't think we need to justify art by saying, no, it really is necessary. I think we need to justify art by saying the fact that it is extravagant is a clue to why it's valuable. Because anytime something is functional, it's functional toward some bigger end, right? And anything that's if anything is a means to an end, by definition, the end is more important than the means. And if creative work is a means towards something, what we're saying is it's whatever it's a means toward is more important than the art itself. Anyway, that's what I was thinking about as I was listening to your story.
Yeah, I've had someone talking to me who was thinking about how someone had said to them, God is not always efficient. Mm-hmm. And to them, their reaction was almost like, is that blasphemous? to say that God is not efficient. And yet, so that phrase also struck me of sometimes efficiency is not the end goal,
Yeah,
and there's
absolutely.
Things like beauty and generosity are not very efficient.
Yeah, there were some loaves and fishes left over after that miracle. It wasn't just enough. It was extravagant. It was a little prodigal, Well, do you still keep up with Emma?
I do, a little bit. We are not in regular contact, but I was able to visit her in her home in England 2 summers ago. Yeah. It was really sweet to see her. Saw her kitchen fully tiled with the Mexican ceramics, and still has a crowded home with lots of artwork. So yes, I have been able to see her in person recently, which was a joy.
Well, good. Well, I wish you good progress on your road away from frugality and toward extravagance.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I don't think we've ever had a content warning on the Habit Podcast before, but this next story from Isla Rickerton deals with an act of shocking violence. If you're listening with children, you should probably pause now. Isla Rickerton is a pen name of one of the writers in the Habit membership. When you hear this story, you'll understand why she chose to disguise her identity. But this isn't just a story of violence and suffering. It's also a story of hope. Here's Isla Rickerton reading In the Beginning.
In the Beginning by Isla Rickerton. Part 1. Unmaking. Once upon a time, I had 5 children. But that's not where the story begins, is it? I'll try again. Once upon a time, I stretched in the summer sunshine, felt every inch of me alive, and thought I understood life. I cried through an entire box of Kleenex, maybe 2, and thought I understood grief. I buried my grandparents over a span of a few years and thought I understood death. I didn't. But the story doesn't begin in any of those places either. Now, let me see. Were you born in a hospital? I was. Twice. That second time, of course, is what I'm trying to tell you about. That second time began with unmaking. It was the scissors that gave it away, the ones that the EMT was holding. Not the baseball bats and pocket knives turned into weapons in my son's hands. Not my busted-up split scalp. Not the many puncture wounds in my body that had left red sprays across the carpets and walls of our home. Not the running, the begging, the crying, the screaming, or even the praying. No. It was the huge, sharp, silver scissors, glinting in the morning light, stretched wide and waiting at the bottom edge of my favorite blue hoodie, held impossibly still in the EMT's big hands as he asked me, "May I please cut off your sweatshirt? We need to see where else you're wounded." That, you see, was the moment I understood. This was my unmaking. They stripped me then and fed me naked, limp, and bleeding into the belly of the ambulance that waited on my lawn. Doors closed around me. Sirens blared. Then we were off. Time wobbled and stretched during the ride to the hospital as heaving, wailing contractions of pain rose and fell all around me until the ambulance backed right up to the hospital doors and 6 men leapt out, carrying me on a gurney amidst them. 6 pairs of boots echoed on the tile floor as they ran down the long, narrow hall. The wheels of the gurney scraped and screamed at their passage. Then the emergency room doors flung open, and I was at last delivered into the hands of skilled surgeons and their team of busy nurses for the remainder of the day. I don't remember the remainder of the day, but sometimes I still dream about the sound of those boots, pounding and pounding and pounding against the floor beneath me. Birth is a sloppy, complicated business, no matter how you go about it. I woke 7 hours later, shaved bald, washed clean of blood, and thickly swaddled in a cozy hospital bed under the cooing, smiling care of a soft-spoken nurse. She fed me yogurt and strawberries, told me stories, and checked my bandages. There was a sweetness to it all, strange as it was. Life. In the emergency department of this hospital, at 38 years old, I had been reborn, alive. Part 2. The New. Forgive me, friend. I must take a breath and shake some reality back into my bones. Horror is not my purpose here, despite how it fills every corner of my story. I'd like to tell more if I can. Dare I tell more? But where was I? Ah, yes. The new. On my second day, I graduated to the trauma ward on the 4th floor of the hospital. I liked it there. There was a quietness to the 4 tall blue-gray walls of my room and the foggy glass window overlooking the city far below. The ever-blinking, beeping machines that surrounded my bed would have bothered some, but they gave me a sense of vigilant safety. Just before breakfast on my 3rd day, a doctor whisked into my room who walked too fast, smiled too wide, and trailed a pair of interns that hardly looked up from their shoes. "You're recovering remarkably well," she told me through her blinding smile. "I'm marking in your chart to send you home tomorrow." Home! The word shot through me with shards of icy panic. What? Tomorrow? Images of every house I had ever lived in flashed a dizzying parade through my mind. What home? I don't have a home, I told her. Yes, well, the doctor said. I'm sure we can get that sorted out. When she left, I looked at those cool, comforting walls, and I knew I didn't want to leave, not ever. But that doctor never came again, and neither did my abrupt ejection. Months later, I learned that my hand surgeon, pushing for more time on my behalf, refused to let me be discharged until he could perform the necessary surgery to repair the many severed nerves and tendons in my fingers. He earned me an extra week of care and respite. God bless that man. And so I got to keep my room. Maybe I liked that room so much because all the drugs the doctors pumped into me sent me constant messages of, it's okay, you're okay, and everything's okay. Despite my many bouts of racking tears and the physical pain I can hardly put words to even now. Maybe it was from the astonished joy on the face of every nurse who sought out my story. Have you met the woman in 427 yet? I heard them asking one another. She's a living miracle. Go and see. Sometimes I truly felt like the miracle they all said I was. Other times, I blinked at my Frankenstein reflection in the bathroom mirror and ran numb fingertips across the dozens of staples in my shorn scalp and along the stitched lines holding my cheek and throat together. Every inch of skin that showed around my sagging hospital gown was a sickening, spreading patchwork of purple and green bruises. I had never been much afraid of blood or injuries, but this was living death. My body, you see, remembered dying. Very clearly. I could still feel and smell and taste every moment of it, and living made no physical sense at all. And so I stared and stared and stared into that little mirror, willing myself to feel like something more than a corpse who just wouldn't stop breathing. I'm alive, I would tell myself, pressing my forehead against the cold, unyielding glass. I made it through. I am alive. It has been nearly 5 years, but on my hardest days, I still see that reflection in my mind's eye, and a small voice deep within me wonders, did I really survive? Really? It's a haunting feeling. But, alas, I am getting off track. This is not a ghost story. After all, I was telling you about my room. Maybe, yes, that's where I was. Maybe that little room in the hospital trauma ward felt so welcoming and safe because that's where the new began. In those raw early days, experiences lit up like sparklers in my mind. First steps all on my own. First slow, careful walk to the end of the hall and back. First meal eaten with my own 2 barely functional hands. First trip outside failed. The second trip was the first to succeed. Tucked snugly under a blanket in a wheelchair, I sat for 10 minutes in a tiny enclosed courtyard bursting with flowers. First text message to my best friend. Hi, I typed. Just reaching out. I love you. I cried buckets over that handful of words. First embrace from my husband. So tender, so gentle. First brush of a kiss, more a bomb than a sparkler, crashing through my addled brain. Wife, woman, joyful, shocking reality, entirely familiar and entirely new, all at once. That's how it all was, really. Months later, my neurologist would tell me that nothing magical had been happening. My damaged brain was simply reconnecting neural pathways which had been interrupted by all the blows to my head. I think I only frowned in response. I didn't have the words to explain it then. Perhaps I do now. Part 3. Shoes. Patients residing in the hospital trauma ward are never allowed to wear shoes. Coincidentally, neither are they allowed to go barefoot, which leaves their feet tucked into enormous, ugly, floppy hospital socks with flaky rubber pads glued to the bottom. Ew. If you ever have a friend or family member staying more than a day or 2 in the hospital, please, oh please, bring them some socks. Extra soft, well-fitted ones if possible. Also, if they're a writer, a notebook and a pen, or they may be forced to invent their own. I gave in to wearing those socks, but even with my scarcely functional hands, I needed badly, so badly to write. I suspect that you understand. So I stole a fat black marker from a paper cup beside the whiteboard that rolled into my room every morning during checkups. Then I ripped off the back page of drug information, flipped it over, and started writing. The first thing I penned in wobbly kindergartner script read, "My name is Isla Rickerton, and I have 5 children." Underneath, I carefully spelled out each of my kids' names, first, middle, and last. Finally, I affixed the paper to my wall using a small strip of medical tape, since it was that, or toothpaste. Each day when I practiced walking back and forth across my room, my fingers brushed over that paper again and again. As days passed, other pages joined that first. Many of those artifacts have not survived the passage of time, but I still have that very first page. When I took it off my wall to pack it up, a chunk of blue-gray paint came off with the medical tape. I'm only a little sorry. I got to take a piece of my room home with me. When I hold that page in my hands now, it still echoes with agony and wild hope. You see, one of the names on my list was struggling to attend college classes and stay normal and sane despite suddenly living out of a hotel with only his dad. 2 had been locked up tight in juvenile hall, but I had no idea for how long or where each would go after that. 1 attacked alongside me, hung on to life by a thread, kept in a medical coma in a hospital across town. Updates came in by the hour. Still alive. Somehow, God knows, he was still alive. And the youngest, she had been whisked far away to her cousin's house, where she was showered with mountains of gifts and love as extended family, glad for this one they could touch, struggled to cope with the impossible. Friend, please excuse me for a minute. I could use a cup of tea. Chamomile, I think. There. Yes, that's better. I can still hear myself repeating it. My name is Isla Rickerton, and I have 5 children. I spoke that sentence aloud as I walked in my sagging, frumpy socks, my fingers seeking and finding that page on my hospital room wall over and over. I think deep down some part of me understood that once I left the hospital, I wouldn't ever be able to say that sentence in quite the same way again. A few weeks ago, my daughter, now 13, anxiously asked me if it was okay that she never tells people she has 4 brothers. Not anymore. Most of her friends either don't remember or never knew what happened in our family 5 years ago. And most don't need to know. I put my hands on my daughter's shoulders, met her eyes, and answered, 100% okay. Our story is not for everyone. What about you? I rather hope that it is. I dutifully wore my unfriendly socks all the way through the day I was finally discharged from the trauma ward of the hospital. A nurse pushed me in a wheelchair out to the curb of the parking lot where I stood up, and leaning on my husband's strong arm, shuffled my socked feet to the waiting car and away at last to begin sorting out the pieces that were left of my life. It took many more months of recovery before I was finally ready to visit home again. And it took multiple visits before I braved entering the house. When I at last approached, I wore snug socks and comfortable tennis shoes laced around my feet. Slowly, purposefully, I walked in, opposite of the way I had been carried out so many months before. Through the front gate, around across the lawn, up onto the deck, and into the back door of my bedroom. As I crossed the threshold from deck to carpet, I could hear the rustle of the first responders' uniforms and see the faint image of the gurney that had lain right where I now stood. Again, I could hear the big EMT's voice, the one with the scissors, though he had put those away by then. "We need to move you to the ambulance," he had told me. "Do you think you can stand up and walk?" On the floor beside me, I saw the ghostly image of my bare right foot shift an inch and then another. Memoried despair welled up within me, but relief and joy were right on its heels. Presently, I lifted my chin, took a deep breath, and stepped past. "Yes," I answered aloud, surprised by the conviction in my own voice. "Yes, I can."
Isla Rickerton, thank you so much for sharing the story, for being willing to share a story of kind of the worst thing that ever happened.
Oh, you are humbly welcome. You know, we write what we know, and that is my experience, so it is what I write.
Yeah. Can you talk to me about how the writing process was connected to the recovering process, both physically and emotionally, mentally, spiritually?
Yeah, so it was an interesting, I've been a writer since I was, 4 years old, making up imaginary stories. And so it was a part of my recovery from, those days in the hospital when all I could write down were names on the wall. Mm-hmm. But once I got home, it became very clear that writing things down was a way of putting them down. So when you go through big things, not everything gets shared, but to put it down in writing, then it doesn't have to be carried on my own shoulders in a sense. And that was incredibly helpful along the way. Yeah. It also is a good way to remind myself that I'm still human, that despite the extremity of experiences and how foreign that is to so many people, it's also just very real, flesh and blood human experience.
Yeah. Can you talk to me about the how you decided. It's one thing, and we talk about this in the habit sometimes. It's one thing to write things for your own sake, and there's value in writing things. I'm going to be borrowing your phrase, by the way. Writing things down is a way of putting things down, which isn't necessarily the same thing as it being something to put out in the world and give to other people. Can you talk to me about your choice part of this story? I know there are parts of the story that you haven't put out to the wider world. How did you arrive at the decision that no, this part of the story I want to tell?
The heart of it is prayer and following the Lord's leading. I didn't intend to write a leaving home story, but the idea got stuck in my head. And the opening of this story was very stream of consciousness. I thought, there's no way I can write this down. It's a fairy tale. It starts with once upon a time. Yeah. And that's how it just sort of started spilling out. So it just became clear as I wrote it down that this was something I felt steady enough that it was worth opening up to other people because it may help other people. So that was my hope.
Yeah. Well, I trust that it will help other people. And I appreciate your courage in being willing to share this story.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Isla, so much for being a part of this.
You're welcome.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. You can support their work, including this podcast, by becoming a member. Visit rabbitroom.com/membership. Special thanks as well to Taylor Leonard for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorleonard.com. The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.